Good morning. It's a super dark video again, and going into shovel snow early. So this video is going to be about it's going to be more combat centric. I'll get back to horror horoscopes probably tomorrow. I don't know. Well, I'll record it tomorrow. At least I don't know exactly when it'll be uploaded or whatever, but you know. Yeah, man, it's relatively warm for how much it snowed. So combat stuff. What sort of like a bunch of not weird. I always default to calling something weird if it's not easily or commonly understood, I guess. So I want to talk about like combat breakpoints and that kind of stuff. So we finished the first, we've been calling them spotlights. I guess that works. Like, it's just like a single arc or a single mission, whatever you want to call it. You know, for my SCP game, I just tend to call them missions. And that works well enough. But anyway, combat breakpoints. So something during the 40K game, something that I was noticing, and this is also something I try to design for my SCP game, but I'll get to that. We were fighting like 60 dudes, like 60 like little cultist guys, and we're, you know, space marines. We've got I had like 144 health. I'm doing an average of 84 damage a turn with all my resources going, that kind of thing. And something I noticed was generally especially with, well, my melee weapons and my ranged weapons do the exact same damage. I'm playing effectively a ranger. Something I noticed was my normal attacks do roughly, or they have a relatively high chance of killing one of the cultists in a single attack. So as long as I hit and as long as I roll at slightly above average, I'll kill an enemy in one shot. You know? So, what does that mean? Well, it means what it says on the box. Kill an enemy in one shot. But why is that important? Because usually, the way damage is looked at is just more damage is generally better. And you don't know what you're going to be fighting, how much health something is going to have. So it's a lot harder to design, think about, okay, is an extra D8 on my attacks going to matter? Yeah, more damage is great, but is it going to change combat in any meaningful way? Is that boss we're fighting going to go down in 5 turns instead of 6? And that's what I mean when I say combat breakpoints. And that's usually like a video game term, an optimization term, you know, say if you're looking at a game like a competitive game like Marvel Rivals or Overwatch or whatever, a breakpoint would be, can you kill, if you're, take Spider-Man for example. A breakpoint would be, can you kill a 250 health enemy in a single rotation of cooldowns, Spider-Man versus Black Panther. Spider-Man, I think, can't kill a 250, or maybe he can't kill a 275 enemy. I don't know exact Spider-Man numbers, but Spider-Man has difficulty killing a squishy target, squishy being the lowest health possible. He has difficulty killing a squishy target in one round of his cooldowns, and especially if something is on cooldown, he just can't do it. And likewise, a character like Black Panther, he can kill a 250 HP target with one rotation of spear, dash, spirit rend dash attack, spear, spirit rend dash attack. That'll kill a 250 HP target, but he can't kill a 275 HP target. He has to mix in a melee attack or get a third hit, an additional hit in somewhere, or his teammates have to do a little bit of damage, something like that. And those are usually what's called is a breakpoint, because that's what kind of matters in combat, like not just how quickly can you kill a target, but how many actions and like mostly how many actions will it take to kill a target, to eliminate an enemy and get them off the board. And in something like D&D or other tabletop games, it's like, okay, how many turns will it take to kill like a big target, or like how many individual small targets can you kill in a single round of stuff. And there's a lot of ways you can kind of change this. Like, you can do like swarm rules for big groups of enemies, but ultimately you're still just doing like, okay, and like my players can do this much damage in a round. And like for my SCP game, for the first group of players, I looked at all their damage, and none of them were like big damage dealing classes or characters, so it was relatively easy. I looked at the rogue, and it was like, okay, the rogue, if he gets sneak attack, I think he did like an average of like 35 to 40 damage, whereas everything else without resources wasn't important. Metric. Without resources, they do under 30 damage. So I gave most of my like kind of medium enemies, like the regular like guards or whatever you want to call, like whatever connotation you want to give them, I gave them 30 HP because they would either need to burn a little bit of resources to kill one, team up, or get really, really lucky and like get a crit or whatever in order to kill them. Whereas if there's an enemy that I want them to be able to kill in one shot, I either give them like 10 HP, 15 HP. Not a whole lot of difference in those numbers in practice, because there just isn't a lot of difference in those numbers. If a player is doing 10 damage, they're probably doing 15, 18 damage. Like they're probably doing 20 damage, essentially. Then, or I might just give them 1 HP, and that's an idea. Like, minionize everything so they just go down if you hit them. But something I was thinking about for the 40K game was maybe there should be maybe there should be cleaving rules, or implement swarm rules so that like every group of enemies is like a single big block of HP, but for every 20 HP, for every 20 damage you do to that swarm, a dude falls off, and that swarm has 1 less attack. That kind of thing. And those are extremely similar. Like, okay, well, you're still killing a dude with 20 HP, but with the swarm rules, or with cleave rules, it's essentially this. It's effectively the same. Positioning can matter in the case of cleave rules, but in that case, it's like, okay, you need to do 20 damage to carve off a guy, but if there's any damage left over, it'll still count, towards the next guy you cut off. Like, and I think that can matter, and especially because the DM is kind of looking at, he's played the tabletop before. He played it for a long time. He's drawing a lot of inspiration from how the actual Warhammer tabletop game works, the board game works. So I think either implementing like some swarm rules or cleave rules, I think could really I think could really like drive home that point of like a Space Marine carving through a big group of little guys. That could really, I keep saying the word help, but I think it could really drive home that idea. Because something I was noticing during the combat was the bolter weapons that we have, the firearms that Space Marines use, they have this kind of splash damage effect where you can spread the extra fire damage that the guns do to enemies around them. And that's essentially, it's better than cleave. So something I was like finding myself drawn to was just use like trying to, I was like, oh, I should just keep using my guns because it does the most damage. But I want to use my claws. So I think particularly for melee weapons, that could really like help draw them and get that kind of those cleaving ideas and carving through a big group of enemies, driving that point home, even though bolters will still effectively do more damage. Because one, if you implement like swarm rules, then the bolters will still interact with swarm rules in the same way. You'll still carve off dudes at certain HP thresholds. But maybe the bolter rounds will still splash? No, they actually wouldn't, actually. So that would homogenize the bolters and the melee weapons a bit. So that is a factor. But, you know, that's an idea. But, so something else I was, like, particularly around the idea of breakpoints, it's like spells kind of don't, like, and this is true in, like, base 5e as well. Like, a lot of the time, doing a big area of effect attack is not worth it unless, like, unless it's either going to actually kill at least, like, as many dudes as you could. Like, this is usually when you're playing, like, a, what do you call it? Like a half-caster that has access to a range, an area of effect attack. Or if you're just looking at individual spell choices. You know, if you're looking at something like Shatter versus Fireball on like a wizard, if Shatter isn't likely to kill anything, just soften them up. That depends, like, what are you softening them up for? If you soften up a group of like 6 enemies, will your fighter or whatever be able to take all of them out in the next round? If not, is Shatter worth doing? Or is Fireball worth doing? Like, that kind of idea. Because maybe it's not. But a lot of the time, something like a wizard will still, quote, resort to doing an area of effect attack like that anyway. Because, you know, that's still kind of their best option to do the most damage and blah, blah, blah. And then everybody can pick them off next round anyway. You'll still do a shit ton of damage and get everything kind of into one-shot range. And a lot of the time, that's kind of the role of something of like what's called the blaster. It's not necessarily to just straight kill a bunch of dudes. It's to soften them up and get them in to the range where they can be wiped off the board. So, you know, there's like... But something I was noticing, and this is also down to like spell choice on our Psyker's part in the 40k game, is like most damaging spell was fucking Agnazar's Scorcher, which is, I think that's a level 2 spell, and it was doing like 3d8 damage, which on average is what, 13.5 damage on average. Not enough to, even if you roll max. What? Well, yeah, if you roll max, it would do 24 damage, right? 3 times 8? Yeah, whatever it is. Like, theoretically, you might be able to kill a single dude, but you are not likely to. Gotta go around this truck. You're not likely to be able to wipe any individual cultists off the board. So, is it worth doing? In the case of the Psyker, yeah, it was, because his other option was like a single weapon attack, which also wasn't going to wipe a dude off the board. So, it was usually better, especially, like, you know, that player was absent the last session, so I ended up controlling him, and it's like weighing all the options. Like, yeah, it's still worth doing to try to just like spread damage around as much as possible, and then either when his turn comes around again, wipe them all out. 2 of these spells would definitely kill cultists, even if they save on like one of the rounds. But the idea is like, okay, then you can, because what you're doing is you're not trying to just like do damage, you're trying to wipe targets off the board so they're not attacking you anymore. That's the whole idea. So ultimately what I was thinking about is, and this, I think I touched on this in another video, like I really do feel like the bigger weapons should do more damage. Woo, what a concept. But I think a really simple way to get that going is essentially just use, like, especially in the 40k game, everything is set up that like everything worth using does an extra 2d6 damage. Everything's a flame tongue, which I think is a really good metric. It's what we use in other games, or in our other 5e games. But instead of just making it an extra 2d6 damage, it should probably be an extra 2d die of whatever that weapon's base damage die is. So in the case of like light weapons that you can dual wield, it should be 2d6. But in the case of, say, like, you know, a one-handed sword like a longsword that does 2d8, it should do an extra 2d8 damage. Or if you manage to two-hand it, it should do an extra 2d10 damage because of the versatility. This also gives a little extra oomph. It gives extra oomph to, you know, basically every other weapon. If you're using a great axe, it does an extra 2d12. Now that's serious. Or if you're using a great sword, an extra 4d6. You know, just double whatever the weapon die is. Add it on as extra. This also gives a little extra utility to, you know, the weapons that only do. This can do, like, add extra utility onto like the plasmas and meltas, but the way their extra damage works is different. So I'm not going to touch on those. But this can affect something like the more sniper rifle focused type weapons, or, you know, like I said, a longsword and shield setup. Now you've got an extra 2d8 damage instead of 2d6. That's a little extra oomph, helping push you towards that like 20 damage metric, if we're keeping it at 20 damage, which I think is a good metric for regular guards and regular enemies, because you do want those little squishy guys to be able to be one-shot. And doing something like increasing their HP to just make them harder to kill, I think is the wrong move. Adding more of them is always a better idea. And I think adding, like, scaling the extra damage per whatever the weapon die is, I think is a really good and probably underutilized way to do that. I've never seen anybody else kind of do it that way. So, you know, it's an idea. It's something I'd like to fuck around with. So yeah, this video is essentially more focused on, or more targeted for our 40k DM. But these principles I am definitely utilizing in my SCP game. Breakpoints are really important, especially for our more martial-focused classes and characters. But that's all I got for you today. Happy snow time. Time to shovel.